There we go. So hey, I'll just let anybody else in, and Jessica, between you and I, we can keep an eye on what's happening on LinkedIn to see if anyone's going, help, I'm stuck. Where are you? Electronically. Um, so thanks for being here. Jessica and I just decided that we would have this as a chat among friends about metrics because people think metrics are harder than they need to be. So if we actually had slides or spreadsheets, it might put people's brains off. So yeah, a little bit of intro. Sam, you don't know Jessica's story, and Tracy doesn't either. So Jessica, why don't you kick in, and then anybody else who joins in can hear your story because I know it, but they don't.
Yeah, so I spent 15 years climbing the corporate ladder. I'm based not in New Zealand. I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina. But I spent a lot of time kind of being schooled in the foundations of business. And then I broke out to be an entrepreneur. And I'm like, wait a minute, wait. Like there's big people metrics, like scaling up talks about like cash and people and teams. And I'm like, what about for the rest of us? What are the metrics we should be tracking in our expertise-based businesses when it's just us or one or two people? And I realized that no one was talking about it. So I'm like, how do I bring my big McKinsey experience, my Harvard MBA experience to soloist business owners who want to move beyond vanity metrics in their business? Because social media likes does not equal cash unless you're actually getting paid for social media posts.
So just for context, Jessica, for you, Sam travels in the digital media world, and he hates the like malarkey of it all. Like his favorite thing is to stop people being ripped off. So he is all here for it. You're each other's people.
Speaking my language.
Yes. So good. Jessica, do you want to give these guys a bit of an intro in terms of if they do want to hang with you and learn from you? Because I know you've got your cohort kicking off soon for folk like us that run like little micro in our own skulls businesses.
Yeah. So I work specifically with expertise-based business owners in order to implement the foundations that take people from random acts of revenue and scattered tactics to sustainable systems that lead to predictable profits. So I have two ways to work together. I have, well, technically three, but I have defining your foundations. If you're like making less than five to $10,000 a month, you're like kind of spinning the wheels trying to figure out what's working. I help you implement the positioning, the business models, the offer structure, sales and marketing strategies, and track it all with finances um, to grow. But if you're like, I like Jessica's style and I want to work with her one-on-one, I have that. And if you're like, I really don't want to invest in a cohort right now, but boy, would it be nice to like meet with people to do my metrics on a regular basis. I have a community where we're all about the rhythms and rituals about sustainable business building.
Um, yeah. And I think that the rhythms and rituals part is why we are each other's people. Yeah. Having been so scathed from corporate life where it's not rhythms and rituals, it's like to do the thing and the thing and the thing at this time. And I don't think small business has space for that rigor. Like, is that how you sort of describe it?
No one likes the unsexy part of building a business. And I'm like, I came from the world of planning. I was a supply chain planning leader back in the day. And so I lived in I was planning 18 months out, and every month was a KPI review. Every season was multiple game plan reviews about like your forecast and things like that. So the rhythms and rituals of business building are in my DNA at this point. But how do we make it more grounded and centered instead of the red being the thing that you have to defend to bosses and bosses and bosses? How does that just be a signal of like, oh, something needs to change here? How can we embrace a red metric instead of being shamed by a red metric?
Yeah, yeah, that's so relatable. And I think I so just for context, guys, when Jessica and I first caught up, I was like, "How did you survive McKinsey?" Because I had a McKinsey experience back in my corporate, and I went through the McKinsey, and like their favorite word was cadence, and you like got hissed out of the room for about 6 months after they left if you said cadence. So whilst I like cadence, I also much prefer the word rhythm or ritual because I feel like it's just not as ugh.
Yeah, I mean, tracking it's like very much like ballet. I've been using a lot of ballet references ever since I read like Rebecca Yarros. She's like the Fourth Wing Onyx Storm writer lady. She has like a book on like dance, and so I read it recently. And it's like going to the bar, like in the BARRE, not like drinking at the bar, although, but like it's a practice, it's a tending ritual that, like, yeah, tracking, KPIs can be transformed from this thing you have to report on that you get slapped around every month for failing, or it can be like an opportunity to really tend to the foundational rhythms of your business and like get to the heart, get to the bones, prune what's not working. Um, it's like weeding, like you never stop weeding, just like metrics tracking. You never stop tracking your metrics because it's always directional indicators of something.
Yes, yes. That's really lovely segue, because I was sort of going to lead with a conversation about leading and lagging. And I know you have your own vocab for how you sort of talk about it in your space, Jessica, but I think and Serena, you might appreciate this because you come at it from a lagging indicator perspective, because your whole role in terms of that finance sphere of business is lagging, right? Like it is an accountant's job or a CFO's job to really look at the lagging indicators, the profitability, the trends, that sort of stuff. But a lot of business owners get trapped in looking at that, and they're not focusing on what they can control in the here and now, which is what I call leading indicators. And it's the habit change things, it's the rituals, it's the things that you put in, and then choosing. So if I was going to pick one thing that would help me know that I was doing that well, that then should translate into a lagging indicator that someone like Serena would come and validate, I feel like we don't spend enough time talking about that. Would you agree, Jessica?
I would agree. And I don't think we talk enough time about the time it takes, like, that you have to put in the leading indicators. And I think we're like, oh, well, I did it this month, so it should show up next month. And I'm like, oh, no, 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 no. We don't talk about the time between action and result. And tracking your metrics is a really great way to see that.
Yes.
Because we live in like the constant dopamine, like, oh, well, I posted 4 times on social media and therefore I must get a client. I'm like, no, that's not how it works. It's not how it works. As much as we were told by the gurus that that's how it's supposed to work.
Yeah, the marvelous 7-step framework does not work in the real world because humans are pests. Numbers do what they're told, but humans are pests. So I think for me, leading indicators are quite often like the smallest steps we can break our focus into, and then you choose to craft them into your week. So whether you're running a small business like you or I, or you're running a bigger business, they're the smallest thing you can ask someone else to do. And that includes you asking yourself to do it, because we're all really good at being dingbat bosses to ourselves. But I know you have different vocabulary for talking about it. So do you wanna get on your soapbox and have a riff around
Yes.
leading indicators?
Yeah, I do have slide. If now that we're on Zoom, you would like me to show a slide.
Let me make sure you can share that.
I mean,
There we go. Does that work for you?
it does. The way I think about slide, or the way I think in the slides, the way I think of slides, the way I think about leading and lagging indicators in like a sustainable business for me is like, it's like a tree, right? The fruit you're harvesting, that's like the ultimate measures of health. That's like the revenue, the profit, the cash, sustainability and hours worked is here. This is where client renewals come in and new client acquisition and sales, right? All the joy. The sprouts you're tending are like what I'm calling the signs of signal. These are like, okay, something is working and it hasn't translated into revenue yet, but it's like getting there, like proposals and inquiries. Also like earned visibility opportunities. So like if you're trying to market your business and like you get a press mention, like that's a good sign. It's like it's an early stage result, even though it hasn't resulted in revenue yet. The seeds you're planting are all about the things that you are actively doing. You can't necessarily make a sprout happen. You can't make fetch happen. I don't know if that's a phrase that anyone gets outside of the US, but the seeds you're planting are like the action steps you're taking. So in a service-based business, this is doing outreach. This is proposing partnerships like this one. This is publishing content, like long form creative content. And then all of that becomes easier by strengthening the roots of your business. So like you can do a whole lot of things, but if you don't have systems to make it all easier. So, if you're doing a bunch of outreach, okay, setting up your CRM. If you're doing a presentation, like having like standard slides built, like these are things that are assets that make it easier to do over time. So like technically, like a leading indicator would be seeds and sprouts in this example, but like, how do we give ourselves credit for like, we have to do work to also make seed planting and sprout tending easier and to get more from the fruits that we're doing. So like, I like to separate into like early stage signal about sprouts, because it's like, man, I haven't gotten a client yet. I'm like, oh, but you put 5 new people in your pipeline.
Mm.
Well, it's going to go like that. You can see first before you get the client. So how do we not go from like, I had people to like, and it might take 3 to 6 months to get clients, but if you got a workshop booked or you got that first intro call secured, like that's like signal of like, it's starting, even if it's not the full fruits of your labor yet.
Yeah.
That's a good point of view on metrics, and that's my fluff.
I think the other part in there is, depending on your business model, those stages have different time zones. And in terms of, so like I always say to people, for me, I know that those seeds, I love that visual. The seeds that I plant are conversations. So it's FaceTime with me. And I know that those conversations will start to move into those little sprouts or signals, but it won't be for 90 days. And I think that that is where the algorithm malarkey is just hard, because the algorithm malarkey is, unless you're a unique, sit in that sort of sector of the business where you've got a burst pipe, so you Google plumber and then Sam's magic work lands your client because the Google ad was in front of you when you were making your decision. But there's very few businesses that actually sit in that instant that I'm ready to buy. And I think sometimes when we're considering our metrics, we don't consider the customer journey to go, what are the right time zones for the metrics?
Well, on that topic itself, like, okay, so you Google a plumber, you don't pick the plumber with 1 5-star rating. You pick the plumber with 100 5-star ratings. So, a leading indicator would be, what's your percentage of people that leave a review? Because that like, if you only have 1 review, no one's going to buy you. They're going to like go to the one that has 100. So like that would be another leading indicator of like, well, if actually no one's leaving you 5-star reviews, that's a problem. That's going to lead to like the timeline being a lot longer.
Yeah. And then the other thing is, I think we can boil the ocean and get too complex in terms of what we're looking at. And when you and I were sort of talking about this, we're both less is more. And so I think that if you're going to pick something, pick it and stick with it. And that 90-day period is always really good. And then you can go, oh, now I get it. Let me add another thing.
Yep. And I think there's also like 90 days and also like minimum viable like level of effort. Like people are like, oh, I did some outreach and I got enough response. And I'm like, okay, like let's be really serious. Like if you email people, only 25% of people, even people will like respond to your email. And of those people, only 5 to 10% are actually ready to buy what you want at any given time. So when you tell me that it doesn't work, I'm like, all right, are we talking about, do we have a large enough sample size for this activity? Like we have to have sometimes like minimum activity targets as a leading indicator to be like, well, if you didn't do 100 touches in the past 90 days to your network, then don't complain when you didn't get like, a client. So I'm like, all right, well, doing like 1 podcast pitch a month does not count as podcast pitching as an activity.
That's just accidentally doing a thing. There was no planning to that. I don't know. I was just me being a dick, perhaps. But I go, if you're just scattering it, that is just hope and prayer.
Yep.
And this is probably, Jessica, where you see our corporate kind of like, you got to do it. You got to do it with enough rigor that you can take it. But I have a client, for example, that he has a team member and she's really focused on the outbound part of his customer journey. And so we're like, okay, what we're aiming for is you to pick up the phone 20 times in a daily shift. We have no control over how many people answer. Is it the right size of business? Do we book a meeting from it? But we're going to start with pick up the phone 20 times, and then after 2 weeks And they're like, oh, but it's not work because I've not booked any appointments. It's like, no, but that's why we said we were going to like run this experiment for 6 months, because we know for this particular business that the customer decision-making cycle, it's not like calling to say, hey, you need your windows washed because it's in the run up to Christmas, you know?
Well, there's this also this concept called resulting by Amy Duke. This is, so you have the 20 calls, but like a lot of times people will say, well, I didn't get the outcome. I'm like, well, did you do the 20 calls? And they're like, no. And I'm like, well, then don't come complaining to me when you didn't get the outcome, right? Like we know, we kind of know that, like, when we don't get the outcome, we can say, did I execute the plan? Yes or no. And if I executed the plan and I still didn't get the outcome, then we can say, do we know why? Is there something happening after the outbound calls? Is there something, macroeconomically, although we can't use that as an excuse all the time. But if we didn't execute the plan, then we can't necessarily say, well, we don't know if we didn't have the right control. Like that's the resulting, like you can't blame the result on the plan if you didn't execute the plan. Like we don't know if the plan was going to work because we didn't execute it.
And I think you have to give a best stab at the hypothesis on why this leading indicator and expected outcomes, so that then when you're looking at your lagging indicators, you can go, red flags, green flags, like, holy heck, what's gone on there? And that's where you can problem solve for performance and efficiencies and streamlining and stuff like that. But you can't streamline or get more efficient if you're not able to root cause that stuff between the gap between what you put in and what you were getting. And that's where I see a lot of people going wrong. They're going too hard one or the other without having the space to watch it run and then problem solve back to the root cause.
Did you ever, in your corporate days, did you talk about top down versus bottoms up planning?
Yeah, and you need both.
Yep. It's like top down, like I think I have a hypothesis of what I need to do to get the outcome, and bottoms up planning is actually doing it and saying like, all right, well, I don't actually know the hypothesis. I don't know how many calls it's going to take for me to get one client. I really don't. So I have to do the activity to wait and see what happens and then see if it matches my hypothesis. So you have to do that both thing. A lot of times, this is what what happens with course sales with my people. They're like, oh, I think I'm going to, sell 10 of these. And I asked how big their list is, and they're like, it's 100. I'm like, that's lovely. And we can use some like industry best practices to say, we think, kind of top down wise, 2 to 3% conversion. If you get 5 or 10 people, then you're doing something incredibly right because you're outside of the industry norm. So I think there's this kind of like, what do I think is the outcome? And then what actually is the outcome, and seeing, am I off industry standard? Am I off industry norms? Is something going well or actually going poorly in my conversion? But I have to know both, like what I expect and what actually happens. I have to measure both.
Yeah. And that's where you get the role of the strategic needs to come in and have that macro view, and where, you would be expecting these types of lagging indicators, this sort of profitability or this kind of conversion. However, then you've got what you can do on the daily operationally. So in my sorts of, the businesses that I'm going into where they've got a team, it's, so how does Joe know on a Tuesday at 10 what to do and how that's going to impact this goal up here? And if you're talking to Joe about our goal is 30% profit this year, Joe doesn't care. Like, that's just like not exciting. Joe cares about, I can show up and I'm aiming to get this work done in 70% of the time allocated. And that's going to feel great.
So I'm curious, Alana, for you and your people, what's the cadence that you measure the leading indicators? Like, how frequently are you measuring that? Are you daily, weekly? What's like the measurement cadence for your lagging indicators? And how does that change based on business maturity, business size?
Yeah. And I think that's where the nuance is, in that there isn't a one size fits all, because, like for Sam's business, totally different than for my business, than Serena's business, than Tracy's business, like, because they're all totally different business models, but also customer journey, so I sit in a really high trust environment. So I know it's going to take someone longer. Sam's solving an immediate problem. He's a quicker guess. If that makes sense. So what my metrics are are totally different than Sam's, even though at the outset you'll be like, oh, here's two people working individually, like surely it's same. And that's again back to the algorithm malarkey, which I know you and I had like got a whole thing about, is you can't 7-step cookie cut or shake and bake this stuff. And that's where you need the external validation, which is great for us because we've got jobs.
Well, I guess for you more like what's in your, not your decision point cadence, but how frequently are you collecting the data? So like for me, like if I were to say, oh, well, I'm going to track how much outreach I did at the end of every month, like that's almost too long to course correct. Like I'm like, I want to see 2 to 3 outreaches a week or 2 to 3 a day. So like, I don't want my leading lag. I don't actually want to like measure my lagging indicators too often, unless it's like I'm in a high, like cash, I want to keep cash on hand. But like, if my cash cycle like spikes at the beginning of the month and then it goes down, like looking at my cash balance every single day is like not helpful because I'm like it's like very lumpy. But if I were to just like wait till the end of the month to try to do all my outreach, then I'm going to be overwhelmed. So like, do you see a difference in your businesses on how frequently they track their activity and progress, even if they're like they're holding off on decision making about that?
I think there's a small percentage of people, probably 5% of people who do daily stuff. That's the difference in an actual high performing culture, is you know what you need to be looking at on the daily. And then I would say you're then working with, like your accountant, like you, Serena, on a monthly or quarterly basis. Like I love quarterly trends because then you start to allow for seasonality. And like for us in New Zealand, we have this weird summer thing where we just all toddle off. And I know all of New Zealand shuts down for 2 months. You don't have it in quite the same way, Jessica, but I do know, like, for example, you guys had that whole election thing. Oh. And so no decisions are being made because everyone's like, oh, I'm just going to wait. And so that's helpful because you can see those macro things and you can see the trends year on year and quarter on quarter. But I think the art is, and then what does that mean on the daily?
Yeah. And I would say that as a soloist, there's like what you do, like, for especially when you're a female and your energy fluctuates, sometimes you're like, well, I'm not going to do the exact same thing every day. So like, what's my cycle of like, okay, well, I feel like a month is too long for a lot of these leading indicators. It's like, you can't just like batch all your sales. You cannot batch all your social media posting in one day at the end of the month. Like you can't, the algorithm hates you. So
is anyone here able to batch that much work in advance? Because we would love to talk to you.
Well, no, it's not even in advance. Like a lot of people are like, oh, I didn't post. Like they're like, oh, I didn't post this month, so I'm going to post like 4 things on the last day of the month. Like it's like a catch up versus a proactive thing. But that's where, I'm like, you can't ignore the leading activities. You can't batch them all at once, depending on like what you're doing, because you need to spread it out because some things you can batch, like you can batch podcast pitching and like you do it all in a month, but like outreach, you have to spread some of that out, so that's where it's like I find that what I call business tending, which is like tracking your leading activities and tracking your outcomes. I'm like, let's track those at least once a week. Let's not make any decisions about it, but let's collect the data on a more frequent basis so you can course correct during the month versus waiting until you review your results to course correct. Because if you review your results at 90 days for both how you did and what you were doing to get that result, the cycle's too long for you to track your activity.
Yeah. And there are absolutely industries and businesses where you can course correct on the daily, but they are high volume, quick turnaround, high production, and typically also high attention. Like they are much more inclined to firefighting businesses. And I don't know that any of us here today are in that space. But one thing I just want to pull up, and I think that what you were talking about there with that fluctuation, we all have weeks where our mojo goes, or days where we're just like at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday, we're just like, whatever, just had a grumpy email from someone, or that deal that I thought I was going to land has just gone nah, or they've ghosted us or whatever. And so I think that probably gives us, Jessica, the chance to riff on why rhythms are important, because I love consistency and I love the book Atomic Habits. However, I think I love brushing my teeth every day. That's about it. I think it's very hard for humans to do anything every day. And that's where some of the myth around performance kicks in. But I do think a rhythm of consistency is really powerful.
Yeah. So there's this I'm gonna see if I can find it. There's this guy I follow talking about the author ecosystems, and he has different consistency profiles. I'm gonna put it in the author ecosystems. I actually asked if I could license this, and they said, we're not doing that yet, but you can just pay us on PayPal, and I did. But he has like, there are some people who like pop up once they're always looking for something new, and so they're frequently publishing books. So like that, it's very high level. There's some people who are like metronomes, like every week I do the same kinds of things. And some people are like, I go big, particularly like maybe in the summer, and I go down during the fall, or like they're cyclical, like particularly like they're during their, the full moon, they are out, they are public, they are doing their things. And then when it's new moon time, they are like, do not put any calls on my calendar. I need to like hibernate. And so there's this interesting, like, you have to know almost like your business's rhythm. Cause like if you're in tax professional, like I wouldn't prioritize any big sales activity during tax season because you're doing taxes. But but some people are like really gear up. They have like 2 to 3 big marketing pushes, like big ass campaigns a year. And so like you're not doing consistent little bits. You're like event. The person who brought us together, Michelle is launch a thing, launch a thing, launch a thing. And I am not that way at all. I'm like, do a thing, a little higher volume, do it, a little higher volume. So like I'm much more of a metronome because I'm a grassland as in his ecosystems. But I think everyone's got such a personal rhythm based on like how much flexibility they need and how much, but it's all like, okay, over the course of 90 days to 180 days, you have to be consistent enough to say like, if my revenue relies on the next thing I launch, I better launch the thing. That's like, you have to know like what your business consistency profile is to know what's the time horizon in which you measure your leading and lagging metrics.
Yeah. I think the other thing is that there is our styles and our own rhythms, and then we have our stages and phases of business and life. And so I actually think metrics are an art form, not a science, which like no left brain mathematician would agree with. Consistent-ish, Serena. Yes, consistent-ish. Because when you're in build stage, your leading indicators are real hustle based. They get out, pound the pavement, get in front of people, yada, yada, yada. But then when you're at a more established, sort of stage in your business, then it is customer outreach and acquisition from a retention view. And that has a totally different rhythm to it than those first hustle days.
Yeah. It's really funny. Like I'm like, when you said like lagging metrics, I'm like, when people are like talking to me in their early stage of business and they're like, what my revenue goal should be, I'm like, don't have one. It doesn't matter. Like, I don't know what your revenue is going to be. I don't know how long you might hit a whale customer with your first month of outreach, or you might take a year to find like that product market fit. Like we don't really know. So like, don't set an outcome goal. I'm like, I don't know. You like one of my clients just like networked her way into a 2-day a week retainer. Like that's like $8,000 a month. I'm like, cool. Like that's way more than like a bunch of random coaching engagements, but like just with one conversation. I mean, many conversations, but like, we don't really know until you've been doing it long enough to like get enough data about what leads to lagging.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I think when you say a sentence like what data leads from leading to lagging, there's a whole lot of people whose brains shut down and go, sounds like hard work. And so I think that, again, yay for us, we have a job because we're showing that that's not actually hard work. It is the small things that you're choosing to do, check in on, and then check that your hypothesis was right. So I'm wondering if there's a good time to pause for questions from the people that are here around like here and now. Would you know what your leading indicators are, or like what consistently-ish would look like? Or do you want to put Jessica and I on the spot and like see how good we are thinking on the fly about this stuff?
I have one more analogy about like leading and lagging. It's like trying to collect all the data at the end of the quarter for like it's like trying to clean out your entire house, spring cleaning, instead of like doing like the little fly lady thing where you clean one room every week and then you don't ever let it pile up. So you're sorting through, Serena, if you're an accountant, you're probably like, I really like my monthly bookkeeping because it can't get so bad in a month when you're like, oh my God, like collecting the data, and this sounds really hard. I'm like, well, if you wait to do it once a year, it's not easy. If you do it a little bit every month and never get too far behind, it's doable. Anyways, okay, I'm done now. All right, we'll open up for questions.
That's a great analogy, though. The little and often is one that I often joke about in terms of you need to treat yourself like that, because that's the rule with my kids. Snacks, little and often. And I feel like metrics, little and often.
Oh, that's a great LinkedIn post.
Okay, thank you. Thankfully, I can transcribe this and we'll be away. So, Sam, Serena, Marie, Tracy, those of you live with us, have you got any questions? You're going to need to come off mute, Sam.
Yeah, I don't have any questions at this stage. Sorry, I was just having a little think.
You're all good. And I think, Sam, I would just touch on, you do a lot of the middle ground, and then your outcomes for your clients are quite often lagging. So some of this is just good for your own knowledge in terms of how you can, because any campaign that you're working on for your clients, right? Like there's lots of leading indicators, but you shouldn't start to see results that are bankable in terms of lagging indicators until that 90-day cycle, right? But often we go, oh no, but like I gave you some money, so give me the thing yesterday.
And don't be afraid to, in my challenge where the, it's like, you know, when the quarterback threw this is American football reference, and the quarterback threw the ball perfectly and the receiver dropped it because the receiver wasn't trained well. Like, you know, like if marketing hands over solid qualified leads and sales drops the ball, like don't be afraid to like challenge I think I mean, if you're in digital marketing, don't be afraid to challenge the other function to be like, all right, one, is the difference, is the qualified lead MQL, is that like not actually leading to a sales lead? Or, you know, is there a, you know, gap in the handoff process? Because that actually could be like, this is where we go from like functional to like organizational. Like if it turns out that what marketing thinks is a solid lead is actually not a solid lead for sales, or they don't know what to do with it, the handoff is dropped, like don't be afraid to challenge and be like, clearly we're not, even my lagging indicator is not a good leading indicator for you, so we got to fix the process somewhere.
Oh yeah, that's a solid point. Serena, you got a question for us?
Yeah, just yeah, how long do you keep doing the thing that you're doing before you go, actually maybe there is something broken in the system?
That's such a good, like, how long should I keep pushing this shit uphill? Yeah.
yeah. I'm mentoring you know, somebody selling window blinds, and he said he hasn't had sales for a while, and yeah, we went through the, you know, what are you doing to get them? But yeah, at what point are we going to go, well, actually it's your conversion that's shit, and you know, you probably need to practice your conversations or something like that.
Yeah, that is such a good point, and I think it's probably a how long is a piece of string and what's the, you know, it's back to business model and fit. I was just down this morning with a client and I had to take one of them out, and I was like, just so you know, we're doing all we can. We can't fix it until this broken part right here gets changed. And I think sometimes, you know, I have a joke that one of my clients is really good at what they do because they just show up different than the industry average. They're in a really trade heavy sector and they don't show up with paint all over their pants and a grimy van late and all those things. And so their conversion's so much higher because they're the opposite to the normal. And that is, Serena, like that's such a hard conversation to be like, look, I can do what you want, but it turns out you're crap at a sales conversation. So the problem here in your business performance is you. It sounds like that might be that kind of a territory, which is like hard to navigate. Yeah.
There's this interesting, like this might be like a theory of constraints. Like you fix the first bottleneck, and when the thing is no longer the bottleneck, then you move on to the next bottleneck. And can you get organizational alignment about like, okay, well, we hypothesized that we needed to get 20, we needed to do 20 dials, and we're not doing 20 dials yet, they're not converting. So like, where's the next bottleneck? And then you can go focus your data collection efforts on, okay, well, are they not qualified when they come in the door? Can we do more with our upfront marketing before we get the leads? Do we need to do more in our sales conversation? Which then, of course, people get mad because then you're like, oh, I got to collect more data there too. God damn it. No more data. And then they call Alana.
Yeah. You make my metrics fun because they're just too hard for my brain. Yeah. Does that help answer your question, Serena, in terms of that specific customer? Yeah. I think that knowing how long you should push the shit up the hill is the hardest thing in business, because our brains are real twits, but sunk cost fallacy is hideous, and you need it. I just think for so many of us, there's no way that we can do that for ourselves. Like, we need external validation to go, what? Like, are you mad? Like, you should have wrapped that up a year ago. Or, no, you're so close. Like, mate, I can see how close you are, and here's why. Here's all the points. And that's why I think, Jessica, your like tree analogy is really great, because those signals are often the sign.
And you talked about like the 90-day experiment, and I think it's really helpful to like have that as like a checkpoint every 90 days. But then I think it's also to say, what was the job we were expecting this thing we were doing to do in our business? So like people are like, oh, social media is not working. And I'm like, great. Okay, if you were to remove social media from like your business, what job were you hoping it did? And what activity are you going to replace it with? Because, oh, well, our sales isn't converting. I'm like, okay, well, if you don't have person A reading this script, then you have to like replace this with something else. And so I think it's nice to say, after 90 days, if we've done the activity and we're not seeing any of even like glimmers of support and hope, okay, well, we might switch the activity out, but we still have to like make sure the job we were trying to get it to do is still, if it's still relevant, we need to do it. I think that's another conversation of like, you can't just like stop doing a thing that's not working because the whole system might fall down.
Yeah. If you just have a duvet day every day, then there's like no one ever to do the work.
Yeah. People in my business, they're like, well, I'm just going to stop doing social media because I'm not getting my clients. I'm like, okay, cool. How are you getting in front of new people? They're like, what? I'm like, yep. If you're not going to do that, you got to do something else. Because if you found that social media wasn't getting you in front of new people, or it wasn't nurturing your audience, I'm like, cool, what else are you gonna do instead? They're like, look at me with like deer in the headlights. I'm like, no. We got to have some kind of like new eyeballs acquisition strategy. So what else are we doing instead? Are we going to networking events with you lovely people in, breakfast time?
Yeah, you're like, I could just, anyway. That gave me a little thought spark that is where sometimes I find having the revenue goal a helpful orientation point. So if you're stopping or choosing what to put in the mix, I find sometimes when you do strip it back to how many of your widgets are you going to try and sell to achieve these goals, which is kind of why you started this business, unless you're, I don't know, flush and just doing it for shits and giggles, in which case, cool. But for the rest of us mere mortals who have, yogurt pouches to put into our kids and whatnot, if you know what you're trying to achieve here, then I find probably 80% of the time with people I work with, if you're clear on that and you work it backwards, you can drop away a whole lot less of the activity, which means you've got less leading indicators you're even trying to check. You can just simplify the crap out of it, because you're like, actually to achieve that at that price point, I probably only need to do 8 of these a week. Cool. That's
how much you talk with your clients about Pareto principle?
Oh, quite a lot. I do love 80-20. Yes. Yeah. Do you want to have a rip about 80-20? Because these guys hear from me. Well, especially Sam. He's from me quite often, and Tracy. So.
Well, yeah, everyone's like, oh, I need to be everywhere. I'm like, you're probably like, I need to talk to all these people for referral sources. I'm like, well, at the beginning of your business, you probably do. You're planting seeds. You don't really know, in the plant analogy, you don't really know which plots of land are going to be the most fertile, right? But once you know, you can stop trying to like till the soil in a non-fertile place. You can just focus on the handful to 2 to 3 activators and referral partners. Do you need to keep, this is where like you got to figure out who your 100 people are that you need in your network, and then dial it back to like the 5 to 10 people who are going to bring you all your clients. Or instead of serving everybody with the same level of service, you change your SLAs so that you're serving like your best customers with the best level of service, and everybody else doesn't get as much of you. And so how do you, yeah, I mean, but I think that's like doing less, but doing it better.
Yes. Which is really hard to do. It sounds super easy. And then you read a book like Essentialism, and you're like, I'm going to be all over this. Or you talk to your team about Pareto principle, Serena. And I love that you did that. I'd be really interested what feedback and thoughts they had. But then what happens is you're in situ trying to make decisions at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, and your brain is just going bing, bing, bing. So your brain makes it this overcomplicated thing, which is also why I actually love leading and lagging indicators, because when your brain's being a dingbat, you can bring yourself back to, no, remember you're just focusing on this. And then it should do that. So me, voice in my head.
Yeah, I think average customer value, you know, you can do like, you can sell to the same customers more, you can sell them more expensive things, you can sell them more often, you can extend life cycle, or you can get new customers. And I'm like, let's do more with the customers we have and drop. This is the challenge with especially growing solopreneurs. Everyone's like, well, I can't drop these legacy clients. And I'm like, can you? You sure you can't? Like, this is where cash buffers are. And this is where like you know, Serena, I'm glad, you know, we got accountant people on the call, but like cash really can help. This like, have you heard the book 10x greater than 2x? Like everyone's like, oh, you got to focus on 10x, and like, you know, and I'm like, well, you know what really helps with that is cash.
Yes, there is. It's
Mm.
great in theory, but shit, it's got some privilege.
Yeah, like I'm like, oh,
privilege.
you raise your prices by 10x and like, you know, try to network your way into that. I'm like, well, yeah, like if you're prepared to say no the first 9 times to get the 10th yes, I'm like, all right, you know, like cash is really helpful in all of this.
Yeah, the adulting on the path to that 10x, there's some nuance that book did not cover. I finished it just so I could say I finished it, but at about a third of the way through, I was like, this is a dumb book. Sorry to anybody here who really enjoyed that book.
It's my next, it's going to be my next YouTube deep dive on books. I did a takedown of Cal Newport's Slow Productivity. Good in principle. I'm like, you know, it's like, you know, publish when it makes sense. I'm like, okay, well, that works when you're like famous, like the Beatles, but like,
yeah.
What if you pay the mortgage?
Humans, yeah, hanging out here in human land. Yeah. Serena, I'd be really interested. Did your team, did that Pareto principle, like, did they get it? Like, could they get that whole 10 a.m. on a Tuesday? How does this, like, what does this mean for me?
We did go away and try it, and then they're more likely to have a go. It was like just telling them, where's your your best productivity time, and plonk, this is my job, and focus wholeheartedly for 25 minutes and then stop, and then do another 25 minutes and then stop. So that's where we were using it to try and be more productive, but it was more about reducing the overwhelm. Yeah, turn off all the distractions and just focus.
Yeah. Turning off overwhelm. It's like worth being a bumper sticker in and of itself. Eh? Again, why Jessica and I have jobs. We're just headache removal artists. Like, who cares what it says on our website? We just actually get rid of your overwhelm.
Well, I love that, like, and, you know, bring it back to like leading, lagging. I love how you talk about like distilling it down, especially working within layers of organizations. It's like, okay, well, what do I, you know, what does Joe in this department need to do? What are his goals? What are his KPIs? How does he know what success looks like for him? That in theory ladders up to the company leading metrics. And that's really hard to do, especially if it's not thought out in like a thoughtful way where like you can actually have competing priorities. So across departments, this is why it's really important to look at like metrics comprehensively across the organization. I have a leading and that lagging metrics funny for you. So I worked at Nike, and it was 95% product on time was the goal, right? But that meant 95, the way it was like kind of like translated was like 95% of the time leaving the factory on time, and 95% arriving to the States on time, and 95% of the time leaving the DC on time, distribution center, and then 95%. So when you like multiplied all the 95% ups, it was like 75% from order to, you know, delivery, because everyone was operating like, in order to be in like 95% across a 6-month time period, everyone had to be at like 99%, and it was going to cost so much money to do that. And no one could like understand how the math worked. But if you were to like improve by 1% and 1% and 1% and 1%, and that might be a lot of money, right? When it compounds. But it's just really funny, like when you don't think about like your leading metrics by department, and when you add them all up, you're like, well, there's no way we can get to 95 as a lagging indicator when when 6 functions have to like in sequence operate at 95%.
And that's why I think, Serena, your point about 1% is just so profound, because it's like that whole, if you stack up who thinks they're a good driver, 120% of the population is a good driver. And so like, clearly that is not true. So like, and then if you do the same thing apparently in households and you ask like, who's doing what? It's like 100%, 110% of the tasks are being done. Like our brains just don't do this, decently. So yeah. Right, I'm wondering, has anyone got any other questions? Otherwise, I think that was sort of everything we said we were going to say on the label. Thoughts, questions, comments, feedback? Yeah, so true, Marie.
Well, for the recording, I talked a little bit about my products and services, but for people who don't know, as much, because you're going to send it to everybody who was attending, how do you work with organizations to help?
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Jessica. And I love that we didn't even prompt that. So Jessica and I do very similar work, folks. It's just Jessica is Northern Hemisphere based. I'm Southern Hemisphere based. We can both work remotely. She works largely with the micro businesses, so the 1 to 3 person businesses. And my happy space is the 6 to 60 businesses. So working on that, oh God, the messy middle. That again, the 10X book says just hire some people and it'll be a self-managing company. I'm here for that. I'm here for the messy middle before it's a self-managing company. So if anybody wants some help with the overwhelm removal and metrics that matter, and look, the metrics can be post-its on the wall or reminders in your phone. They don't have to be sexy, big, bespoke BI builds. So that's me. Jessica, do you want to drop into the chat how to come and find your cohort details? Because I do think that for some of the people here and both on the recording, that will be a very helpful resource as well. Because they firmly
I'm going to have my first 3. There's like a special once a month time frame for Australia, New Zealand, and who knows, maybe I'll go global and I'll have someone from Asia, sign up. I've got some on my list.
And you just be totally creative with when you find stuff and do the time zones. But Sam, I'm glad that was really helpful, even though you've been up since Sparrow's fart. Marie, I hope that that's been cool for you. And Serena, maybe there's some stuff that you can take back for both your team as well. But thank you so much for gifting us some of your time. Super duper appreciate it. And yeah, see you around online and in person soon. See you.